right now.
Okay.
So you.
Okay. Welcome everybody to the first department seminar of this semester, right? And as I understand it, it's actually the first seminar for about almost 1 year, and actually the first department seminar we have online. So please apologize any glitches we might have, right? And first of all, I want to tell something about housekeeping information, yeah? Please turn off videos and mics, apart from our department speaker for sure. We will have a QA session at the end, so please raise your hand and have questions in the chat if needed. We will try our best to address those, and I guess Zizan will help out. Okay, before we start, I just want to say you something, because today I've received the news, and it's actually a sad news for the Atmospheric Chemistry Society, okay? Because I've received the news that Paul Crutzen has passed away at the age of 87. So he was among the 3 who discovered the ozone hole, and he received the Nobel Prize in 1995. And among those 3 were also Sherwood Rowland from UC Irvine and Maria Molina from MIT. All of them have passed away at this time. Sorry about this, yeah, but I wanted to share this information because it really touches us, the atmospheric community. Okay, so, but let's move on. Today's speaker is Dr. José Luis Jiménez, and I'm very glad to have him with us today, and exactly today at the beginning of another challenging semester. And I think we did it on purpose. We discussed a couple of things, but we thought it would be the best to talk about COVID-19 related stuff at the very beginning. José Luis Jiménez has received a double mechanical engineer degree in 1993 from the Universidad de Zaragoza in Spain and the Université de Technologie de Compiègne in France. And he received a PhD in mechanical engineering from MIT in 1999. He had some postdoctoral fellows with Aerodyne Research and with Caltech for 4 years. He joined the University of Colorado at Boulder as an assistant professor in 2002, and he became a full professor in 2014. I hope I did it right. Okay, and he has got a huge experience in atmospheric aerosols. Actually, he is one of the world-renowned scientists in atmospheric aerosols. He's a top 10 cited scientist on aerosols. He has published more than 400 papers in peer-reviewed journals. And once again, I'm very glad to have you with us today. And I think it's yours, right? So I will give the floor to you. Welcome, Jose.
Thank you, Bernhard and the department for the invitation and for that kind introduction. So I'm going to talk about the modes of transmission of SARS-CoV-2, what we know, how to protect ourselves. And for those of you who knew me before the pandemic, they'll be like, what is this guy doing talking about that? Normally I work on air pollution, atmospheric chemistry, climate change, always on aerosols. But when the pandemic happened, I switched some of my work to dealing with aerosols for the transmission of this disease that I hope I will convince you they are very relevant. And there are many links there where you can find information. At these links, you can find these slides if you want to look at them later. And I will show these links again at the end and put them on the chat. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 2 things, more about the first, what do we know about the modes of transmission, and then a little bit about the second. The things that of the second, we know a lot about, distance, washing hands, but I'll talk about the things that I think are less well known, but they're very useful. Okay, so how are these respiratory viruses transmitted like SARS-CoV-2 or many other viruses? They can be transmitted mainly in 3 ways. One is if we touch an object that an infected person has touched, like a phone or their hand or whatever, and then we touch with that contaminated hand, we touch the inside of our eye, the inside of our nose, or the inside of our mouth. That can transfer the virus to a mucus, and that can initiate infection, right? And then there is 2 other ways, which are basically little balls of saliva and respiratory fluid that fly through the air. And that we call, in this field, they call them droplets and aerosols. And they only differ on their size. They are all droplets, as we will call them in atmospheric science, and they're, wet bits of material. But here in this field, droplets means projectiles, little cannonballs. They leave us and they're big enough, they have enough inertia to fly like a cannonball. And if they can hit someone, if they don't hit someone, they fall to the ground, right? This is what they explain sometimes, the distance. You need to keep your distance so these things don't hit you, right? And this is spray-borne drop, and if it doesn't hit, it drops. If it hits you inside the eye, in this very small exposed area of the nostrils or inside the mouth, that can initiate infection. If it hits you here or there, somewhere else, then nothing happens. And if it doesn't hit anybody, it falls to the ground. But then there is these other little balls of material that are much smaller, the aerosols of different sizes, and these float in the air like smoke, right? Smoke is an aerosol, and it doesn't fall to the ground or whatever, it stays floating. We're used to see what it does, and it can fill a room. And then aerosols infect by being inhaled, not by impact, but by being inhaled. They're inhaled with our breathing, and then they deposit in the respiratory system, different places, and then they can initiate infection, right? So these are the three modes of transmission. And the question is, which is but of course, if it's all surfaces, we have to disinfect. If it's all aerosols, we need masks. So it's important to know how they are transmitted, how the disease is transmitted, so that we can protect ourselves. Okay? So I'm going to say a few things about the evidence we know. But the first thing I'll say, we know surfaces are not major. CDC has been saying this for a long time, that it's thought that surfaces can transmit the disease, but that this is relatively difficult. It's difficult to transfer a lot of virus, and so washing hands is fine, and we should keep doing it frequently and stuff. But disinfecting surfaces is a waste of time and money, except maybe in a hospital for the light switches and the door handle. So we should stop wasting money in hygiene theater. But there's still many schools that they have multiple people cleaning everything, and they are not doing anything for aerosols. They're not working on ventilation. So between droplets and aerosols, what does science tell us? Well, it's been a busy year, but there was a National Academy of Science meeting with more than 11 hours of recordings that you can watch in here. And this is a note that appeared in Science summarizing some of the key conclusions. And they tell us, by Kim Prater, also a prominent aerosol researcher, and what they say is there is overwhelming evidence that inhalation, and only the aerosols can be inhaled, is a major transmission route, and is much more likely to inhale aerosols than to be sprayed by these droplets, by these projectiles. So this was published in Science, and I think it reflects the evidence we have. Right? This is more, the scientific community, but what about the medical community? So this is, sorry, this is my animations. Okay. So this is from Clinical Infectious Diseases. This is now the Journal of the Infectious Diseases Society of America. And they publish an editorial. So this is the lessons learned for COVID-19, and this is in October. And then what they say is basically short-range aerosol transmission is an important route of spread, and longer-range transmission can occur in closed, poorly ventilated spaces, right? So now the infectious disease communities, some of them are getting on board that this is really what's happening. And I think the best quote of the paper is, perhaps the biggest surprise about airborne spread is that it has been surprising to so many people, especially in these fields of epidemiology and medicine. And I'll tell you why it has been so surprising and why there is still very stiff resistance, even still at CDC and WHO. Different organizations, scientific organizations have been moving in this direction. So this is a report I was part of for the Spain's Ministry of Science. And, with epidemiologists from Harvard and a bunch of virologists, and there were only 2 aerosol people, myself and one other person. And what we concluded is there was substantial support for aerosol transmission being dominant and droplet transmission, these projectiles, having been overestimated, right? But still WHO tells us the droplets is what's important. So this is kind of what the science is telling us. But what really matters is not what the science is telling us, because that doesn't quite get to people, but what the public health agencies are telling us. And this is much more of a mess. So WHO came out clearly on March 28th with this tweet, which is still in Facebook, and Twitter and whatever, where they said, fact check, this is not airborne. This disease is not transmitted through aerosols. It's transmitted through these droplets that they're too heavy and they fall, what I described. Right? And they couldn't say it any more strongly, because they said that to say that it transmits through there is misinformation. Right? So they said, it's just not wrong, it's just misinformation. So they, And they really, this message arrived everywhere. There's many countries, many people who just, they still believe this. You know, this was said very strongly. Nothing has been said against it anywhere near as strongly by WHO. So in the 9th of July, after we published a letter with 239 scientists, you know, they updated their transmission brief. So this is where they summarize the science, and this is still the latest one. It's in the 9th of July. And what they told us then, you know, is that droplets, the projectiles, this can occur. This we know, and then they can do the things I described. The aerosols, well, they have generated hypotheses, and this theory suggests, and someone could inhale aerosols. However, we don't know. Later they say we need more research, and it's basically, you know, you read this, and any reasonable person reads this, it's like a droplets for sure, aerosols, maybe it's a few percent, but you know, and more recently their position has been evolving because the evidence has been so overwhelming, as I'll summarize later. And two number threes at WHO, Maria Van Kerkhove, Maria Negra, in November 2020, they gave videos and talks where they say, ventilation is very important, and we need to change the air in a room 6 times per hour, and this is very important. No word about why. Why is ventilation important, but no mention that the virus is in the air or nothing else. Just ventilation is important, which gets people very confused, and then people don't know what to do, and they know, why. If people don't understand, they don't put the measures in place. More recently, actually, 4 days ago, this document appeared, and so as I said, the document, the official document on transmission, has not been updated since July last year. But just 4 days ago, this is the clinical management document. So this is a document where they tell hospitals how to care for people who are sick. But in there, someone alerted me, it's like, look, they have actually updated the text. And they indeed say that the disease can be transmitted through all these different ways. But it can be, for the first time, they say, they don't say, well, possibly, but they actually say it can be transmitted by aerosols in enclosed spaces, indoors, whatever, including choirs, as we will see later. So they're finally saying it. This still has a bunch of errors and is not in the right order, but anyway, they're moving in the right direction. So this is WHO, which influences most of the world. What about CDC? So this is I think it's still on their webpage. So CDC they know that aerosols are the main way, but they just couldn't say it more confusingly, They say these are small droplets, but anyway, they say these particles can be inhaled, and this inhalation is the main way the virus spreads, and only aerosols can be inhaled. So what do we know? How do we decide, who's right? So we have to look at the evidence, right? So in terms of what we know, there is a note. Perhaps you can mute the person.
Yeah, if you're not a speaker, please mute yourself.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You can also go and unmute people. Yeah. Anyway, so what do we know about transmission? So as I said, surfaces are not major. Something very clear is that it is easily transmitted in close proximity. You're talking to someone close, you're likely to get infected if that person is infected, right? And WHO has a video that was also in the 28th of March that explains us why, according to them. Like the projectile leaves this person, and then they hit this person in the eyes, whatever, and then that person gets infected. Later in the video, they keep distance, and we know empirically distance works to reduce disease. Their interpretation is distance works because the droplets follow a parabolic trajectory and fall here, and then this person now is safe, right? And they conclude, and a lot of epidemiologists conclude, that the fact that distance works is a proof that this is the mechanism, that droplets is what's going on, right? It's how the disease is transmitted. This is a logical error that we told them in April last year, because this is, it's a plausible hypothesis that if these droplets exist, this may be why distance works, but it's not the only hypothesis, right? We also have aerosols. If you talk to a smoker, if you are very close to the smoker, you will inhale a lot of smoke. If you keep more and more distance, you will inhale less. It's visualized here with exhaled CO2. Or here, this is a CFD simulation, and we see this person is talking, and then the air at the beginning comes very quickly, and then it stops by friction, and it mixes with the air and gets diluted and rises because it's warm and that kind of thing. And then if this person is at this distance, the more than a meter, that's going to be a good distance to get less infected. If that person was here at half a meter in close proximity, they will be breathing a lot of the air that person is exhaling. Much like if you are here, you would smell the garlic in this person's breath. Here, you wouldn't. So that's that's an equally plausible hypothesis. So social distance working alone is not proof of droplets. That's an error. We need to look at more evidence. And the easy evidence is like, is there infection when you keep your distance but you share room air? With droplets we would be safe, and with aerosols we would not be safe, because like smoke, with time we can get infected, and that's what happens. As I will show later. So basically, you can get infected very easily here because it's high concentration, but you can get infected here, with more time and if there is low ventilation. Okay, what else do we know about transmission? We also know that it's transmitted much better indoors than outdoors. Okay? And I'm going to show you some data from contact tracing in Japan, where they found people who were infected who had already met with others, indoors or outdoors. And then they analyzed, okay, the people with whom the infected people had met, did they get infected or not, depending on indoor or outdoor, right? So indoors, they followed 22 people. Outdoors, they followed 88 people. And out of the 22 people who met with others indoors, 6 didn't infect anyone, 16 did. Outdoors is the opposite. Of the 88 infected people, 77 didn't infect anybody, 11 did. Yeah. So much, much more, 20 times more likely that you infect someone if you meet them indoors than if you meet them outdoors. And how many people you infect? So, outdoors is almost always 1. Indoors, you start to see 3, 3, 3, 4, 9, 12. You start to see super spreading. Okay? Now, in terms of explaining this, if you are indoors or outdoors and someone has these micro speed projectiles that have enough inertia to reach your eyes, it doesn't matter whether it's indoor or outdoors. Maybe in a hurricane or in a really windy day, it does, but most days, the wind outdoors is too low. But for aerosols, it does matter, because that same wind, even a typical day, a meter per second or something like that, is much larger than outdoors, than indoors, where you have speeds of 0.05 or 0.1 meter per second. So the air is moved much faster, and if it rises, it doesn't encounter the ceiling, but it just goes away. So aerosols can explain, that we have much less transmission indoors. Droplets cannot. And if it was 50-50, then transmission would go down a factor of 2, not a factor of 20 when we go outdoors. Okay, so what else do we know? So we know, they tell us, it's different than the airborne diseases because it's not like measles, and I'll say something about that later. But a feature is also a very unequal disease, right? Some people give it to a lot of people. It's super spreading. Some people give it to nobody, right? So we're going to look at this a little bit. So it's this super spreading, and we know 10 to 20% of the infected lead to 80% of new infections, and for those they are 0 is 10 to 20, or something like that. More for the new variants, right? And that's hard to explain with surfaces or whatever. So let's look at one case, and this is a case that we investigated. This is the Skagit choir in Washington, so I'm sure you all heard about this. So this was a rehearsal in March 10th, and then out of 60 people who attended, 52 got infected. And it was later known there was one person who was infected and had mild symptoms. And this is not a picture from the choir. The density of people was about half this much, because the choir has 120 people, but only 60 showed up because they knew about COVID. This was in Seattle when it was hitting early. And people, and what is really helpful about this choir, of course, they were extremely helpful, as was the LA Times journalist who first broke the story. But what was really helpful is they had a lot of structure in their actions. These are people who don't see each other socially, and they live on a large area, in a large rural area outside of Seattle. And then they all arrived, they hadn't seen each other, and they all arrived for the rehearsal. And they, mostly sing, they arrive just in time, sing. And then they take a break for 10 minutes, during which they have to go to the bathroom and they eat some snacks. And they tell us on average, they are talking to 2 or 3 people, during that break. And then they sing. And then it's late and they mostly leave, right? That's kind of what they told us themselves. And they told the choir and all this. And the CDC has also published an article just describing some of these things, but we investigated more in depth for the modes of transmission. So could these 52 people be infected with surfaces? No, I mean, the CDC tells us surfaces are inefficient, and they knew about surfaces. That's what they told us early in the pandemic. So they have bottles of hand sanitizer, all the doors were propped open, and they didn't touch each other. Nobody reported touching anybody, you know, so they were worried about that. So basically it's not possible. And the index case didn't touch anything. She only went to a bathroom when 3 other people went. No, so not possible through surfaces. Who did with the droplets? Well, when they were singing, there was no one in front during the whole time. There was no one in front of the index case. And, you know, so if there were droplets that were falling, they were falling to the ground, right? But there were people 13 meters behind that got infected, you know, how do you explain that? And then we say, well, what about the break or whatever? Well, during the break, as I said, this person didn't talk to anyone, and other people talked to 2 or 3 people, and the CDC tells us, you know, you need to talk to someone for 15 minutes in close proximity, you know, to get someone infected. So it's not possible to get people infected that way, even if there was some other index case we don't know about. That's not likely, but it's always possible. It's just not possible to explain with droplets because of this structure of the event. Could it be aerosols? Yeah, it's easy to explain with aerosols. There was a room with low ventilation. It was well mixed by the flow of singing and by the heat of our bodies. And they were wearing no mask and they were singing, and singing is one of the activities that leads us to expel many more aerosols, right? About 10 times more aerosol than when we talk and 50 times more than when we breathe, something like that. And even I'll show you later, quantitatively, this makes sense compared to other outbreaks. And this is an example that I mentioned because we have investigated, and I personally think is the clearest. But all the super spreading events point to aerosols. You know, the Starbucks in Korea, the restaurant in China, the call center in Korea, you know, 2 doses and other choir events, they all point to aerosols. I'm not aware of a single super spreading event that has been investigated where, you know, the evidence is 10% as strong as this, that it was the surfaces or it was the droplets, you know. So super spreading is very important, transmits a lot of the disease, and every time you investigate it, it points to aerosols. Okay. And so we're going to look at it quantitatively, and this is, we're going to use a box model, which is kind of like the kind of model that Yushuan uses to study the atmosphere, except this is the kindergarten version, right? We have a box where chemicals go in and out, and we're going to use this to model a room, and we do this for pollutants, and we can do this for the virus and aerosols, right? And actually, this model, the model that we use for the choir, and then I turned it into this tinyurl.com COVID estimator. You can download it in Excel or make a copy in Google Drive, and I tried to make it easy to use early in the pandemic as a way to basically try to get the information out there of what you could do to protect yourself. People are interested. So we're going to use the model to look at outbreaks. Okay? And here we're going to show the attack rate. So the attack rate is how many people got infected of the people who were present in this event, in this super spreading event, how many got infected, right? And this is a risk parameter, and I don't have time to explain, but basically, the higher the number, the higher the risk of aerosol transmission. The more aerosols are in the air, the louder they're talking, the longer the time, the less the ventilation, and the other way. And you see that it varies over many orders of magnitude. Okay? So now, what about other airborne diseases that are accepted by everybody? Tuberculosis and measles, right? So measles is kind of the prototypical super highly transmissible disease. And this is from the literature. The typical case, you know, typical outbreak will be here, and a strong outbreak will be there, you know. So even though the risk parameter is very low, this disease is so transmissible that you still get very high attack rate. That's why it's so scary, you know. If the next pandemic is like measles, then, you know, we don't have a chance. Tuberculosis, on the other hand, is transmitted only through aerosols, but is much less transmissible. You know, a typical case, you know, even on a very high risk situation, doesn't transmit very much. And this is, you know, the strongest outbreak we found in the literature. And what happens with tuberculosis, you know, with COVID-19, people are infected for a few days. With measles, something similar, maybe a week. But with tuberculosis, people are infected for a year. So the disease survives by people being contagious for a long time if they are not treated. But just, you know, in every encounter, in every choir, you may infect 0 or 1 person, but because you can go to the choir 50 times, the disease can survive, right? So where does COVID-19 fall here, right? And so this is the data we have compiled, and this is the choir. You know, it's about the highest attack rate, but you see that they all line up. You know, all the outbreaks we found in the literature, they all line up, and does this agree with the model? Well, these are the curves of the model. So actually, if this is airborne transmission, actually, it seems to follow the model pretty well. Except here, I think here, at the low end, when the risk is lower, but we still see an outbreak, it's like, well, most of the time it's actually here, but if it's here, we don't hear about it. We only hear about the unlikely outbreaks that happen despite low protection. So we think, quantitatively, this is consistent with aerosol transmission, and the outbreaks are consistent, saying the disease, when you have super spreading, it's a self-consistent disease, as much as diseases are. So, so what else do we know? And people will often tell us, well, it's not airborne. That couldn't go through aerosols because many people, are in the same home and nobody gets infected. Someone was infected and you find out later nobody got infected, right? And so you wonder about this, and we've looked at it. So I'm gonna say a couple of things. First, I will put some historical perspective. So I'm gonna compare a couple of diseases, and then I'll tell you later what they are. So disease A is a disease in the transmission is through droplets. This is what the public health authorities are telling us. And for successful transmission, we need close contact within 1 meter. And for disease B, same thing, droplets, and we need to be within 1 meter. And for disease A, they tell us, we hospitalized 192 patients, and there was someone sick there, but there was only one transmission, despite the air was mixing and all that, right? And for disease B, something similar, there was a lot of people were exposed, and then they were not infected. But then for disease A, you do see a bunch of these outbreaks with a lot of people who get it in ships, in buses, in schools, in poorly ventilated rooms, and in bars. And for disease B, you see a similar pattern, right? So which are these diseases? So this is tuberculosis and measles, who are now fully accepted to be airborne, until 1950. And for measles, 1985. When I was in high school, we still thought that measles was a droplet disease, even though now they tell us it's the super scary airborne disease. And so it's a similar pattern. It's like an airborne disease doesn't need to transmit all the time. You have sometimes it transmits, sometimes it doesn't, because of what I'll say later. And it's really the outbreaks that overturned, that made like the choir for COVID, that just made it untenable. They just could not explain the transmission any other way, which is this disease. This is COVID. This is WHO telling us about COVID. That is for the same argument. So the same errors they've made for many decades for measles. They spent 70 years telling us measles was not airborne. They've been doing for the last year for COVID-19. So what explains this surprising thing that sometimes you don't have transmission, even though people share the air, but other times you have a lot of transmission? And I think it's just the mental model of WHO seems to be, if someone is infected, they are always emitting a lot of infectious aerosols all the time. If this is true, if that assumption, that hidden assumption is true, then if you don't see transmission, then it cannot be airborne. The only problem is that assumption is not true, and it can still be airborne, right? Because the aerosol emission is very variable. People for this disease are only very infected for a short period of time before symptoms. This is basically how infective people are, and it's just before symptoms start or just shortly afterwards that people are highly infective. Then people who are very sick in the hospital, they are not very infective for the most part. So even though, like that case in the hospital, it's not that surprising that people didn't get infected. But it's not only that. There was a study from a colleague in China, from a group of scientists, and they measured directly how many viruses were coming out of patients, people who were infected, right? And they measured, something like 80 or 90 people. And they found that 27% of the people exhale many viruses. On average, 1 million viruses per hour, and it varied between 100,000 and 10 million. And 73% of the people didn't have any detectable virus in their breath, even though they were infected, right? And even some people were measured twice, and one time they had virus in their breath, the other time they didn't, right? So it makes sense, that this kind of explains super spreading alone, basically, that you have people who are infected and you have people who are not infected through aerosols. And then these people won't infect anybody in their house, and these people will infect a lot of people, like in the choir or in a house, right? So basically the mental model of WHO is wrong. If you see cases of no transmission, when you share the air. That means there were no aerosols in the air that time, not that there were no aerosols in the air anywhere for the disease, right? That's another logical error, which again, we told them in April, they have yet to fix. You know, so then, see how I'm doing time-wise, okay. So I'm gonna say one more thing, because WHO tells us, you know, these droplets are larger and there are many droplets and they have more viruses. And so we have to look a little bit at the physics of the droplets and aerosols, which is kind of how I started to get interested, you know, because, I mean, this is from that brief of July 9th, but they were saying this before, you know, they said the droplets are 5 to 10 microns. And if something is 5 to 10 microns, it basically falls to the ground in seconds, right? And then aerosols are less than 5 microns. Now, this is an atmospheric sciences department, and you may have heard of the fact that cloud droplets are 10 to 20 microns, and they don't fall to the ground, you know, the droplet, you know, the clouds will be falling to the ground really quickly. So we're like, what are they saying, you know? That's kind of, and then we started looking into it. But anyway, so then this is a typical size distribution, you know, from measurements of how many, you know, droplets plus aerosols come out of people. Again, this is a diameter in a log scale, and this is how many in a log scale. The virus is here, but the virus doesn't come out alone. You know, it comes into larger speedball spaceships, as we'll see later. And WHO was telling us, you know, these guys are aerosols, so yeah, there are more, but these are droplets, and we also have a lot, and they have more volume. You know? So I mean, if you do the accounting, it's 50 times more aerosols, but they're smaller. But there's a ton of droplets, right? But that's what they're telling us. But then you know, it's like it doesn't make a lot of physical sense. So can we check this? And we can, and we don't have to go very far. You just go to the CDC webpage to their Aerosols 101 tutorial, and they tell us that a 10 micron droplet falls a distance from a person to the ground in 8 minutes. Right, not in, and a 5 micron droplet is half an hour, you know, so it's not nothing to do with what they're telling us of, you know, that they fall in seconds, basically in a couple of seconds, right? And really to fall in seconds, you have to go to 100 microns, right? You know, so it's a volume of several thousand times what they're telling us, right? And so, you know, so the WHO to this day, they haven't rectified, is making an enormous error on their aerosol physics, you know, and no wonder they don't get things right, and we'll see a little bit why later. Fauci, you know, was contacted by Kim Prather, Don Milton from our group, and they explained to him, and to his credit, he immediately said, "Oh yeah, how could we think that 5 microns? They told us I was totally wrong." And the thing, he's a smart guy, and said, this means there is much more aerosol than we thought, but it also means that there is much less droplet than we thought. So we go back to here, and this is what WHO is telling us, and then this is what's really going on, you know, that below 100 nanometers, these are actually aerosols, and then the droplets don't start at 100, you know, they start at 300. When we're talking droplets or particles that come out at 100, they fall to the ground, but they don't have enough inertia to fly and hit you in the eye or something like that. To actually do that, they need to be 300 microns when we're talking, right? So what they told us it was 5 is 300 microns. You know, that's not a small error. You know, and when you study the dose of droplets and aerosols, you know, that this is in a conversation. You know, so what you see is that they both distance, as I said earlier, you know, they both fall with distance. You know, you get impacted by less projectiles and you inhale less aerosols. But at conversational distances, you know, this is an order of magnitude, every tick mark, where orders of magnitude more likely to inhale aerosols than to be impacted by droplets. So this droplet mechanism is nonsense, other than when people cough or sneeze in your face. You know, as CDC does tell us, it's inhalation that's getting people infected, right? And actually, this is the dose of volume, but actually, for all the diseases that have been measured, the aerosols per unit volume have more viruses, you know, and there's actually a paper under review that shows this for COVID-19, I'm told. Anyway, you know, so this is, I saw this in a paper from Hugo Lee, one of the leaders in this field, and that came out this year. Reviewing the literature on large droplet transmission and this impact transmission, one can find no direct evidence for droplets transmitting as a road transmission for any disease. So never in the history of medicine has it been shown directly that droplets transmit any disease. You know, this is shocking. And then immediately this disease appears, and WHO tells us, to this day, is droplets, even though never for any disease has been shown, while for aerosols, we have many diseases that have been accepted. Anyway, so I'm going to skip over this because of time. Okay, so I mean, and this is from a summary I made. When you look at the evidence, the evidence for aerosols is overwhelming. For surfaces, there is some evidence. For droplets, there is little evidence, and it's actually a strong evidence again. So I don't have time to explain more. I mean, I've explained some of the rows here, but basically it's pretty overwhelming. So how do we get here? It's like, how are we in a situation where WHO is so resistant? They're supposed to follow the science, and it's like there's a historical problem here. So during the history of humanity, since Hippocrates, people thought air transmitted diseases, these miasmas and whatever, but in a very phantasmagorical way. The air could come from miles away or could cross the Atlantic from the US and give someone the flu in the UK. And in 1910, Charles Chapin, who later became the president of the American Public Health Association, wrote a book called The Sources and Modes of Infection, in which he conceptualized contact infection. The germs don't live outside of the body, the germs live in the body, and you get infected because someone has infected you, someone has given you the germ, right? With tuberculosis or COVID or whatever, that seems obvious, but it wasn't. He was the guy who came up with that concept and conceptualized the social distance work. So this book he wrote became a textbook, super successful, right? But he has a problem, and he says here, this is the last page on one of the chapters, says it's impossible to teach people to avoid contact infection when they think they're being infected through the air. And for the air, we just don't have evidence. We don't know. It's possible, but we don't know. So then he turns this absence of evidence into evidence of absence. And he says, there's no evidence, so we are warranted to discard it. He basically takes the position that airborne infection is almost impossible. And that to prove air infection, that's an extraordinary claim, which needs extraordinary evidence, which is the position of WHO. That's what they told us in April. This is, what kind of things are you telling us? This is crazy that this will be airborne. And they needed, this huge evidence. And we're like, you don't have that evidence for droplets or surfaces. And they're like, yeah, but we know that. Many diseases go that way. So, there's this huge historical bias. So there's now 110 years that aerosols basically have been considered. They don't transmit diseases except some exceptional diseases like measles and tuberculosis, but, so they are not studied. There was a doctor who posted, the number of hours studying aerosols or ventilation in medical school is 0. So they don't study that. And the experts in WHO don't, they're not experts on aerosols. They never studied them. And they say huge errors like the 5 microns. This is from a data scientist who worked with them on masks, which are aerosol filters. And he said, I'm yet to be in a meeting or an email with WHO. Where has any aerosol scientist? So how are they going to get it right? And the key committee that determined that this is droplets and continues to say so is there is no single aerosol scientist there. They are all hand washing experts and waterborne pathogens and this kind of thing. No wonder the first thing they told us is we had to wash our hands, even though now we know that doesn't make so much of a difference. And they published a paper so bad that it's embarrassing, but it's still, these people to my knowledge, WHO has not invited a single aerosol scientist to join the committee. So what's going to happen is that the error is finally becoming obvious, and I don't think the cat is going to go back in the bag, and we are going to realize that that most diseases go through aerosols, and it has huge implications, for the flu, for other pandemics, but we're facing major resistance. This is one of the members of the WHO committee who said, these guys like myself are chemists, engineers, owners of ventilation companies. I don't own any company of any kind, but anyway. And they don't understand disease transmission, whatever. There are more nuances than they realize. Like, well, there's certainly more nuances than they realize. And and it's not like aerosol science is the most important. I agree with this doctor that said, there's all these things that are more important than aerosol science. But aerosol science, there is a huge error, and we really have been messing up this pandemic by not acknowledging it. Okay, so in the few minutes I have, hopefully I've convinced you that maybe we should consider aerosols if you didn't already. So I'm going to say a few things. So of course distance works. We already knew that. Masks work because they filter the aerosols, and washing your hands work because they produce transmission through surfaces. I'm going to say a few things additionally, kind of in terms of protecting us from breathing air, right? And we have these frequently asked questions in tinyurl.com/FAQ-aerosols, and there's 60 pages. Every question I'm ever asked is already answered here with links and whatever. So, if you're interested in more details, do go there. I think the most important thing, though, is we will need to give people a clear message, right? And this is the daughter, the 80-year-old daughter of a doctor, that once she understood, said, oh, so COVID goes around in a speedball spaceships, and we get infected by breathing this. And she wrote this poem that I really like, COVID can be anywhere, spreading in the air we share, breathing, talking, singing, shouting, sends the virus on an outing. Outside, it will fly away. Inside, it will stay all day. Clean the air and wear a mask. Stop the virus. That's our task. I tweeted this morning, this should be the official poem of WHO. But anyway, we are a little bit away from that. In a little more detail, and these are some posters that are in the frequently asked questions. So we have to avoid indoor places with many people, with low ventilation, have to increase ventilation, all these things. I will only mention a few in detail, So we should do things outdoors as much as possible. And in Houston, maybe this time of the year, you definitely should, outdoors with distance and with a good mask it's very, very difficult. I would say almost impossible to get infected, And they did, it can be uncomfortable, too hot, too cold at times, but these are schools in New York in 1910 during a tuberculosis epidemic. And, they did the whole winter in New York outdoors, So if they could do it then, you have to get your mind around it. And the kids did better, actually, from reports of the time. Then ventilation is very important. For these diseases that are transmitted through the air, ventilation is takes the air that has the pathogen and puts it outside. So this is a case in Taiwan where there was an outbreak of tuberculosis, but as I said, it's a slow disease, transmits slowly. But they started to see in a dorm all these cases, and they saw that CO2, which is an indicator of low ventilation, was super high. And then they sent the engineers, they started ventilating, CO2 went down dramatically, and the outbreak disappeared. These cases, slow disease, so these people probably got infected here, but the outbreak disappeared. Ventilation works, right? And opening the window is free in most places. But ventilation can be difficult, if it's too cold or too hot outside or whatever. So there is a trick that I wasn't aware of, but I have discovered as part of this work that, we have CO2 sensors that we exhale CO2. So if you measure CO2, that's the indication of how much exhale there is in the room, right? But my CO2 sensors cost $20,000. But I realized that there is these $100 to $200 sensors that use this NDIR. They need to be infrared, this infrared technology. There are cheaper ones, but they don't work. And here in this link, we have evaluated a bunch of the commercial ones. And the way to think about it is 400, which is outside of my house, is basically there is no exhale there. That's climate change and all that. 800, we're rebreathing 1% of the air. 1% of the air we breathe has been exhaled by someone else. 4,400, we're rebreathing 10% of the air. This is extremely dangerous. This is kind of borderline dangerous. And this is in a car, which at the end is a small room where there's not much of a volume of air. So this is I went with my family, and we had the windows closed and we were circulating the air. And to my surprise, in 30 minutes we were rebreathing 10% of our air, which besides, if you share now an Uber or a car with someone else and you are not opening the windows, so, it can be super dangerous. Besides, it could lead to car accidents, as I mentioned. But then all we had to do was put the air in recirculation and to come from the outside, and very quickly we reach much better levels. So if you open the windows a little bit, you need to open them completely, just a little bit, this will go down very quickly. But cars by default are very well sealed, right? So what we've been proposing is that every public space where we share the air, every classroom, every office, every gym, every bar, should have a display that shows the CO2. And this can be done, if it wasn't massively for $50, $100 per place compared to the cost of the pandemic. And this will tell us, when we go places, how well ventilated are there. It's a supermarket with 3,000 per million. You don't go to that one. You go to the one that has better ventilation. And besides, CO2 is already regulated. And for example, Taiwan and South Korea, they already before the pandemic have laws that CO2 has to be below 1,000 ppm. And in Taiwan, they have these meters in classrooms because it's an indicator of indoor pollutants accumulating. And there's actually cognitive decline. So you see here, as CO2 increases, different measures of cognitive decline go down, which, if you are driving a car at 4,000 per million, you may not be as sharp. So I wonder, I don't know if that has been studied, whether that plays a role in car accidents, but I wouldn't be surprised. Okay, so I'm going to skip this aircraft flight. The last thing, about masks, and this has been playing a lot in the media recently, like the masks we have are not good enough. And it's like, That's true, and really they are not good enough for. Sometimes the mask is a filter that if the aerosols go by, if the air goes by, the aerosols stay in the filter, right? Sometimes the filter is not good enough if the mask is just a t-shirt or a bandana. It's just one layer, but often the mask has gaps, and then the air will rather go through the gaps than go through this piece of cloth where it's harder to flow through, right? So this is a video that you can see here where they put a surgical mask and an KN95 masks, but they are not very well adjusted and there's a lot of leaks. And here there is a cloth mask with several layers that is bigger, so it is very well fit. And here you don't see leaks, right? So the fit of masks is critical. And if we could all spend 10 minutes in the mirror and with a wife or whatever, making sure the mask fits well, and that, for men, shaving a path for the mask to seal. If you have a beard, then that would really make a huge difference. Okay. So there is a lot of discussion of air cleaning. This will be the last thing I say. But so what we recommend is first ventilation. If you can get the air that's indoor outdoors and get air from outdoors that have the virus, that's the best. If you can't, it's polluted or what it's called or whatever, then filtration, either with the system in your building, improving the filtration there, or with portable HEPA filters, or there is a cheap way to make a fan with a filter that Rich Corsi, who used to be at Texas A&M Pioneer, and or in some special cases, like in the waiting room of a hospital or in a prison, germicidal UV. We know UV light kills pathogens, but it has a bunch of problems. It's not for every home or for every classroom. We do not recommend putting disinfectants in the air, like, in medical offices, they put bleach in the air between patients, or there's a lot of air cleaners with ions and plasmas and whatever that they do chemistry. This is a very bad idea. I don't have time to, but basically you're putting stuff that's toxic in the air. So nothing, even though I'm in a chemistry department, nothing with chemistry, please. Use physics. Yeah. And let's skip this. Okay. So I'll just leave it there so there is a little time for questions. Thank you for your attention. And these are all the links that I have mentioned.
Okay, thank you very much, Jose. Thank actually very much. It was a very impressive talk, and I think we have learned a couple of things, right? Before opening up for a discussion, I just want to make a comment. Actually, this idea about a CO2 analyzer is great. So I bought one in May last year. Just a cheap one, and it really works nicely. You don't have to spend thousands of bucks, yeah? So it works nicely. And I actually bought it because I was somehow concerned about air conditioning ventilation. As long as you do not really know where the air comes from, I really want to make sure I have got a CO2 analyzer. And if it just rises, then I think we would be in bad shape, yeah? I know what I'm doing, but I do not know what others might be doing. So this is an issue. Another thing I want to say, and this is also amazing, we have to imagine what aerosols are actually, right? Because sometimes I tell the people, just imagine you are outside in heavy drizzle, and this drizzle hangs around and it will just deposit on your face and you cannot really avoid it, yeah? And so I think this way the people might eventually understand that this kind of stuff hangs around. Also, if you're in a closed room, and just imagine you've got a lady there with perfume, right? You will eventually smell it. And what about COVID? It may eventually be there, right? You don't know. At this point, I just have got a question because I'm just concerned about it. What I have learned about COVID, about the virus is, this virus likes cool temperatures, likes high humidity, and likes only limited ultraviolet radiation. Have you ever looked into this at this point?
Yeah, let me see which slide is this. See, 1 second. Yeah, I mean, I've collaborated with people, but it's well known that these envelope viruses, and this is work from Dylan Morris and Lindsay Marr, that they have a U-shaped curve, right? And this is from a more recent paper, and it's even partially understood why this may be chemically. In very dry air, then we have a situation in which transmission, the virus survives longer in the aerosols, doesn't lose infectivity, right? And then we see more infection. And then at intermediate humidities, because we have a concentrated solution and the chemistry that deactivates the virus is faster, then we have less survival of the virus. And then when it gets very humid, the solution gets very dilute. And again, we see that the virus survives better. And actually, I've been collaborating with people in a Latin American country. We just submitted a paper where we think we see this part of the curve very clearly in ambient data, right? So if you are in a, I mean, this is not your problem in Houston, but if you were in a very humid climate, in a very dry climate, then you will want to humidify. Now, I personally don't recommend humidification as much as filtering, because if you humidify, then you're trying to basically kill the virus that you leave in there. Well, if you filter and at the end costs a similar amount of money, then you are just removing the virus from the air rather than trying to make it decay faster, right? And also because humidification can be problematic. If you don't use clean water, you actually generate a lot of aerosols, which can be harmful. And you can actually put endotoxin in there. There's other problems, right? So if you humidify, you want to do it well. But it is true that it seems to be true that that there is an effect of humidity, and intermediate humidities work best for reducing transmission.
Thanks. I've got a quick follow-up question, because there has been some talk about the seasonality of the virus, yeah? But there has also been reports about serious cases, right? In Manaus in Brazil, in Iquitos in Peru. But obviously, there is no real season over there. I know people, it's about behavior of people. I know this, but also, they have got hot climate, it's humid, and so on and so on. Why does this happen over there? Have you got any idea?
I mean, once you start to say this city, this country, whatever, it's a really complex. I mean, it's like the epidemiological models, right? It depends who is infected, what their activity patterns are. Are they quarantining? Are they meeting with other people? How big is the space? Is it well ventilated? What's the humidity? Well, and then we know it's a disease that's explosive. So it's like you have a fire, but most of the time, most people don't transmit very much. So it's like if you have a fire, and most of the time it has trouble burning, right? But suddenly you have an explosion, boom, and there's like that wedding in Maine that infected 360 people at the end, or I mean, through the secondary, or that church service in Korea where I think 30,000 people got infected, right? So, you have a couple of those by bad luck, and, and then you have a huge situation, and then some other city that's doing the same things is lucky and doesn't have that, So I think, I don't know. I mean, the seasonality, I think humidity plays a role for this reason, and also because our defenses work less well when it's very dry, and we also spend more time indoors, and and there is some more reasons. I mean, but it's not well understood. Even for the flu, we don't know. There is no consensus about why we have a flu season. That was surprising. But there is hypotheses that are these ones I mentioned.
Okay, thanks so much. Great. So I've seen that. Yes, Shushan, just go ahead. Now we are just initiating discussions.
Okay, we have 3 questions from the chat. Bernard, can you see it? And okay.
Oh, I've got basically those ones with COVID variants, right? And there is one question about, is there any advice with new variants? Is double mask a good advice?
Maybe. A good mask, I would say that a good mask, just a double mask if both masks are crappy, or if sometimes you have a mask that has gaps and you put another one and you have even more gaps, depending. So then that's a bad idea, I mean, I think what you want is a good mask. Either, I mean, there is the surgical masks are pretty good, but then you can use one of these fix the mask contraptions that basically make them seal, or like an N95 if you can get it. But then making sure you pay attention to the fit. A lot of people wear these KN95s, but then they're basically hanging from their face and all the air is going through the gaps, So that doesn't do very much, So, or these cloth masks, if there are 3 layers of cloth and the middle layer is different material, so you have cotton, polyester, cotton, and it fits well, and it has a metal piece here in the nose, they can actually work very well. Or sometimes you have some that you can actually put a filter, like a piece of like an HVAC filter in there. And those actually also work very well, almost as well as the N95s. So I would say you want to pay attention to it. You want to avoid gaps. Fauci said a mask on top of one another could be useful. I mean, I think what Lindsay Marr, who's a colleague who's done 1 million tests of masks, what she says is, if you wear a surgical mask that would tend to have gaps, and then you wear a mask on top of it that's a cloth mask that's bigger, like the one I showed, that really closes those gaps, then that can be a good idea, you know. And I think I would also scale it with the risk, you know. If you're gonna go to the supermarket 15 minutes, you know, you don't need to be so paranoid. If you're gonna be in an office with a lot of people, some of whom refuse to wear masks, then I would extreme my precautions. And for the variants, I mean, we have to do the same things. I mean, the problem is not that we don't know what to do. The problem is that we haven't been doing it very well as a society.
Great. I think there are a couple of questions which are similar. Just let's find out if there is additional topic about it. I was wondering if you can talk about the different types of masks now available. It's KN95, N95, KF94, surgical fabric, and how those work to block aerosols.
So they all work well. I mean, the difference between that type of version and regular mask is that they have an electrostatic charge. So it's basically this polymer fiber that is a good filter, and then they put a polymer electrostatic charge, and that filters very well. The difference between all of those is exactly how well they're built. And in general, what people find is that the N95s, or the kind that has the straps that go behind your head, seal better. Even in a hospital where people are trained, while the KN95s that go around your ears, they tend to seal less well because of the force tends to make gaps and things like that. No, but again, it depends sometimes in the size of the mask versus your face. If you can adjust them a little bit, make it tighter, you know. So I think it's spend time, you know, in the mirror trying to make sure that you don't see any gaps, and that's a good strategy.
There is a similar question. I would like to know, how true is it that cloth masks do not protect? What if they are such but 3 layers?
Yeah, that's not true. I mean, there are many, that is real misinformation. They protect well, and I mean, if they're good quality and they seal well, and there is a database from a colleague, John Volkans, let me find it here. So this is a colleague in Colorado State, like Lindsay Marsh. He's done a million tests of different masks, right? And this is how well the mask filters. So this is the filtering efficiency. 100 filters everything, 0 filters nothing, as a function of size on a critical size range, right? And each one of these is a cloth mask. And you can see, you know, there is cloth mask, like one of these is a bandana. And, you know, I mean, every mask does something. But then there are other these masks that are the 3 layers or the 2 layers with a filter in the middle that are almost as good as an N95. So a cloth mask means nothing. What matters is the quality and construction of the cloth mask and the fit on your face. And the good ones that are, as I said, 3 layers or with a filter in between that don't leave gaps can be very good. And I think, I mean, they are perfectly good for, you know, for people who are not spending a lot of time indoors in risky situations, in my opinion.
Okay, there's another interesting question. I also heard that COVID was determined not to be spread through the eyes. Is that correct? And in brackets, I mean, we not need eye shields to avoid contagion. You know, I've seen, but you know, this is a different country. They are somehow supposed to wear those shields, right? While on the bus, while on the airplane, in addition to the mask. Is this helpful, or is this just unnecessary?
Not really shields, but goggles. So it is incorrect that it does transmit through the eyes. And we know this, there were cases of transmission through the eyes before the virus had left China. You know, in the early pandemic, there were already several cases of people who they knew they got infected through the eyes. So it can be transmitted through the eyes. It's thought to be less likely. Now, if someone coughs at you or sneezes and the spit impacts your eyes, then you have a lot of numbers to get infected. With aerosols, they can also deposit on your eyes, but you know, you are not breathing a lot of air through the eyes, and the surface is small. So the chances that an aerosol, you know, takes a turn and deposits on your eye is not very high. While you're by breathing, you have a huge amount of internal surface constantly exposed to liters and liters of air. So I mean, and I've talked to other scientists. I mean, some people think the eyes are 1%, some people think it's 10%. So I would say, you know, if you're in a risky situation, get some goggles, like some of these the glasses we use in chemistry, like you can buy my MasterCard that cost $8, you know. A shield is not such a good idea. A shield is good if you are working in a hospital and someone is going to cough on you because you're going to break it. But still, a goggle will do the same thing and it's better. But shields, you know, imagine you're wearing a shield and someone is smoking in the room. Do you think you're not going to bring smoke? I mean, that's absurd.
Yeah.
So,
just apart from this, an additional question. What about if you're wearing a mask and eventually it will become wet? And also, you know, your breathing, actually, exhalation also contains water. What about those masks? Will they work, or how long will they be working?
I mean, it depends. What happens with water is that for the N95s, whatever, that helps the mask lose this electrostatic charge, you know. And then they're still good, but they're not as good as they are when they're new and they're not wet. So we should try not to get them wet, but they can be dried. I mean, in fact, some of the methods to disinfect masks involve getting them wet with, you know, with different ways. So yeah, but it's better if you can avoid it. Certainly, you don't want to get them wet. And that's one reason why in hospitals you see people, they wear an N95 and they wear a surgical mask on top. And the surgical mask, if someone coughs on you, that's what it takes the wetness, and then you replace that one and you save the N95.
Okay, that's a very good advice. Another question. Is there any evidence regarding keeping a tight mask for longer period of time may result in reduction of oxygen and increased CO2 levels in the body?
No, that's misinformation. You can do this with a pulse oximeter. You know, there's these pulse oximeters that cost $30, and you can measure your oxygen, and you can do it without a mask. And many scientists have done it in Twitter. And there's actually an article in The Lancet showing that your oxygen, you know, because basically the amount of volume of air in between the mask and your face is very small compared to how much air we breathe. So yeah, that small amount of air has more CO2, but if you just breathe one more time every 2 or 3 minutes, you know, so your body adjusts. Just like when you exercise, you know, when you exercise, you don't get deprived, you know, you just breathe faster. You know? So that's misinformation.
And I still want to comment on this, that it's still not a gas mask used for warfare, right? It's predominantly for aerosols, so it also depends what it's being used for, right?
Yeah,
okay,
I mean, keep on.
Yeah, okay, another question. Yeah, I see many people with their nose outside their mask. Would you please comment on this?
I mean, what do you want me to say?
Yeah, if it's... Yeah.
I mean, you know, don't do it. Tell them to put their nose inside.
Yeah, I think it's bad, right? Just having the mask, but not really appropriately carrying it, right? Another question. Why do we have to wear masks for this virus, but not when other viruses have surged before, knowing that past disease have been transmitted airborne? Aren't we talking of the same kind of disease, in brackets airborne? Seems odd.
I mean, I think we will, in the future, we will wear masks. And, you know, we see that this year that we've been wearing masks, flu and a lot of other respiratory viruses are very low, you know. So, I mean, I think in the future for flu season and things like that, I certainly, you know, if I go in an airplane in the winter, next winter, and COVID is gone, I'm certainly going to wear a mask, you know, because it's become clear to me that many diseases are airborne. The problem is there was this tradition in epidemiology and medicine of denying airborne transmission. But now in the literature, it has been shown years ago by some of my colleagues that the flu transmits through aerosols, and so does rhinovirus, and so do a lot of other infections. You know, so there was a myth that this didn't help, and that's, you know, but that myth is still reigning at WHO. You know, so and at the similar public health places, and that's why we were not told. But I think that's going to change.
Okay. The next question. All types of masks can be reused. Can they be washed, or is it better not to wash them?
I mean, for like N95 or surgical masks, you shouldn't wash them. There are ways to disinfect them, but this is more specialized. You know, the best way is to put them in UV light or in vapor of hydrogen peroxide, whatever. So you should try to not make them wet for the reason I mentioned. For cloth masks, they can be washed, and when I mean, actually, some of what's going on, if you go to this database, which is in this webpage, there is some mask, and then I don't remember which it is, you know, and then they wash it, that goes down a little bit. So, but you can wash it a few times, you know, or if it's dirty. I wouldn't wash it all the time, but they can be washed, the cloth mask.
By the way, I think it makes sense to expose masks to ultraviolet radiation. But you know, ultraviolet radiation will also eventually hurt the masks. So how many times would you recommend to do this?
There are studies about the kind of the disinfection of the N95s, and I don't remember off the top of my head. I think they can be disinfected a few times, and then they still work pretty well. Of course, it is better. I mean, a new one is always gonna work better, right? But if you just don't have new ones, then they can be disinfected a few times. But you couldn't keep using it, for months.
Yeah. Talking. For sure. Okay, so far those have been the questions. Yuxuan, do you see anything else? Maybe I've missed something.
No, I think you covered very well. I think timing-wise.
Okay, because they came in rather quick, and I think we had tons of questions, right? And I think it was good.
Yeah. So I think it's the audience. If you have questions not covered, yeah, there's one last question pop up.
There's one additional one. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you comment on the ability of HEPA filters to be used in an enclosed space? Can this be relied upon when multiple people need to work in close quarters?
Yes, and I think the person who asked was my former PhD student.
Cool.
or someone with the same name. Yeah, so HEPA filters work very well, and this HEPA filter is just a high efficiency filter. A mask is a filter that we wear, the idea is that the air goes through it and the virus stays in the filter. But we don't have to wear it. We can buy a box that has a fan and it sucks air from the room, passes it through the filter, the virus stays there, clean air goes into the room. And HEPA just means high efficiency. And they work really well. You just need to pay attention that it's large enough for the space and that you keep it on the maximum setting. Many of them turn themselves off or whatever, and then they are not working. The only problem they have is that they're expensive. Okay, they're available, but they're expensive. So I donated some for my kids' class, and it adds up. It's difficult to afford for many situations, right? But the good news is that you can make this thing something that works equally well for $50. Right? You can get a box fan or some other fan that moves a lot of air, and you can strap or tape with duct tape filters that we use for air conditioning. And Rich Corsi, if you look on Twitter, is the Corsi box, which is basically they make actually a cube of filters, and then one side is the fan, and that works even better. But can be done for very inexpensive amounts. And in that case, this is not a HEPA filter. If you put a HEPA filter, it doesn't let enough air through. It's actually what we call a MERV 13. It's a lower grade of filter, like the good ones you would put in an air conditioning system at home. And so there is no reason. I mean, this is one of the most frustrating things, is that there is no reason this shouldn't be done everywhere that we share the air. It's cheap. We put people in the moon, but we cannot do this in every classroom. I mean,
I've got a quick follow-up question. Over the last couple of months, I have been on long distance flights, unfortunately, and it's not fun. And I did not bring my little CO2 analyzer just to make sure what's going on. But can you comment about those filters aboard the planes?
So the airplanes have HEPA filters, and they have a lot of air recirculation, and they filter on a lateral pattern. So, and the modern planes, if you go in a modern Boeing or a modern Airbus, that's good. If you go in a regional jet, those are not well ventilated. And I was working with people, don't remember the exact details, but those are not well ventilated. So I would avoid those, But if you go in a modern plane, they are well ventilated, but you still see outbreaks, because if the person next to you takes the mask off for eating or whatever, or they're talking, you can still get infected, right? And there is one thing, let me show you. This is some data that a colleague from Europe sent me. So he carried one of these CO2 meters in a plane flight from Spain to the Netherlands. And, so here he's in the bus, in the airport, and CO2 is low, but then goes into the tunnel boarding, and that tunnel is air conditioned, but is not ventilated, right? And suddenly you had thousands, more thousands. And then he goes into the plane, and then it's still high, people are coming in, because I mean, Boeing tells the airlines, you have to turn ventilation on immediately as people board, but this airline didn't do it. They didn't get the memo, right? So this person was exposed, this is over an hour, to high levels of exhaled air from others, right? And then eventually the plane turns on when the plane pulls off and turns on the engines. It's 700 parts per million, which is pretty decent considering all that filtering, right? But here, they didn't have the filtering on, and you had a lot of exhaled air. Then they arrive, going to a train, so the rest is okay. So, and for any trip, it's not just, you're sharing the air, maybe in a bus, in a taxi, in a waiting room, and it depends on the airport, in a boarding, So it can be risky, you know. So I would say, you know, anyway, I haven't flown and I won't fly till I've been vaccinated. But if you have to, you know, you have to be careful.
Yes. Just another thing, riding on a taxi. I've seen taxis having this plastic, let's say, foil in between the driver and the people in the backseat. Who's actually being protected? I guess it's just the driver, right? Sitting in the back, it's not really healthy.
No, I think it's if it's a good air seal, you know, then I think both are being protected from each other. You know, if you're in the back, I mean, I will still open my window.
Yes.
And make sure and do that. I think that'd be better. If you have to go in a taxi or an Uber, or you have to share a car, I would say sit in the front with a lot of air coming from the front towards both of you, so that, and then open the back window so you have a lot of ventilation. And if you do that, then the CO2 is very low and it's very unlikely, you know, and you're wearing a good mask. I think it's
yes, I'm just concerned about the fact that I don't know who has been in the taxi before. And what about the aerosols hanging around? I don't know it.
But I think if you ventilate quickly, you know, if you have the windows open and, you know, someone has been in the taxi before, but I mean, when you come in, if the taxi doesn't have a partition, then you're breathing the air of the other person. So definitely open the windows very quickly. Maybe tell the driver, can you wait 2 minutes? I'll pay for it. Just let the air go through.
Okay, great. Thank you. Shushwan, did I miss any other question? Because we have done a lot of Q&A right now.
Yeah, I don't see any, but Julia had a comment there, but I think it's related to the taxi discussion.
Okay. There's somebody raising the hand. You know,
yeah,
can you double check?
Yeah, I saw the hand still raised. Semco, do you have any questions or?
Yes, I have a question. Can I ask my question?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question is about two things. When we talk about the aerosol, so you mean that this virus can stick with this to aerosol, and that aerosol can transmit to the, for example, atmosphere. And another, my question is that how much dose we should get to be I mean that to be infected by this virus, because I think that it's very important when this virus is spread, you know, in the atmosphere, and how much dose, you know, need to get, for example, to be infected by that virus. It's very important for us to know about the transmission of aerosol and virus.
Sorry, it was breaking up. I didn't understand very well. Let me answer one thing, and then otherwise you can clarify. Yeah. I think I understood about outdoors, transmission by aerosols outdoors, and that we think is very unlikely, that you can get infected if you're talking to someone closely for a while and you're breathing much like you would breathe smoke. But if you keep your distance and you have a mask, it's very unlikely. And the UV light outdoors will disable the virus very quickly. And so I think, you know, going outdoors, if you're distance from others, that's not an issue. But I feel I didn't understand at least part of your question, so maybe you can repeat it.
Okay, yeah, just my question. Another question is that, for example, when you talk about the aerosol, you mean that this virus can stick to aerosol or, for example, particulate matter in the atmosphere or not?
Okay, no, that the virus already comes out in an aerosol. So out of us, when we talk and when we come aerosols, and these aerosols, I mean, it's not this. This is actually what's in the Journal of the American Medical Association, and it's totally wrong. Now, there's these pictures that there is the virus coming out with water, the water evaporates, and you have the virus alone. It's not that. What comes out of us are balls with water and mucin and sodium chloride, basically, or saliva or respiratory fluid, that have a few viruses sprinkled on them, 0 or 1 or 2 or whatever, and then they dry and they make something like this, you know, a few microns, probably is what we think is the most important size. And then, you know, so now if this comes out and you may breathe it, and in the same room, you may have a pollution aerosol, and, you know, and they may stick together. Maybe the pollution aerosol sticks to this other aerosol that came out of us, but it doesn't matter. The pollution aerosol is 1/10 of the size of this thing. So it's like you have an elephant and a squirrel sticks to it. The elephant doesn't notice, you know, so kind of this interaction is not thought to be important. There is other things like that could be different. If you're in a place that's very polluted, what could happen? I mean, we know for smokers have more trouble getting infected. And this is because the smoking destroys the cilia that clean up the things that deposit in our respiratory tract. And the cilia is where the receptor is for the virus, right? So smokers have trouble getting infected, but if they get infected, they have more serious cases because they already have all this damage on their lungs, right? So pollution is thought to do something similar, but not through the particles sticking together. As far as I know, that's not important.
Thank you.
Okay, I think this concludes our department today. Thanks so much, Jose. You did a great job. And I guess I really want to thank you once again. I'm just the only person who can applaud. But, you know, thanks so much. It was really helpful at this beginning of this semester, right? And I think we have our little meetings in the afternoon, and we will be happy to talk to you once again. But have a break, okay? Thanks so much for talking to us, okay? Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.